Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of This weekend. I'm putting my extensive TBR on the back burner because over the last few months, I've read a lot of heavy books that took deep concentration. And due to the amount of focus that those books required, I simply needed to read something quick and easy as a palate cleanser. So, with that in mind, since my good online friend Nisa and I had been talking about wanting to read more Aron Beauregard, we decided to buddy read his cult classic, The Slob, which this book had been gifted to me a few years ago by another good online friend of mine named Brandy. Now, before I get started, I know there has been some debate if this book is splatterpunk or extreme horror. And to be honest, I think the author is the only one who has the final say in where this work truly belongs. However, over the past year, I have noticed discussions about the difference between these two subgenres. And from what I observed, splatterpunk is the idea that although the work is gory, it presents a method to the madness and a purpose that comments on politics, religion, or society. Which, more times than not, the brutality in splatterpunk is used to emphasize these subjects. But opposing that, extreme horror is for no other purpose than to simply repulse and shock its audience. And personally, while some may consider this work to be extreme horror, I do feel like it blurs the line between extreme and splatterpunk as it does comment on quite a few subjects. Also, I would like to point out that if you're easily offended, this book presents graphic scenes of abuse, fetus mutilation, torture, and sexual abuse. And if these are subjects that you don't care to hear about, then you will definitely want to skip the spoiler section of this review. Aside from that, as I earlier mentioned, my good online friend Nisa Buddy read this with me, and I'm super thrilled that she enjoys absolutely disgusting crap such as myself, because due to our shared taste, we had a lot of good conversations about this book's themes, characters, and hyperviolence. So, Nisa, thank you for buddy reading this with me, and Brandy, thank you for your gift. And, of course, if either of you are watching, I hope you enjoy this review. But without me rambling on any further, let's go hang with Vera and find out why door-to-door sales can be a nightmare come true. The Slob by Aron Beauregard takes place in the late 80s and opens up from the perspective of a battered woman named Vera who has been tortured nearly to death, and she believes that her life is now flashing before her eyes. From here, a backstory is provided on how she ended up in this predicament. And as she elaborates, it's revealed that she came from a family who suffered from poverty and mental illness, which this resulted in her childhood home life being one that was full of clutter and filth. Yet, one day, upon her seeing what a clean home should look like, she begins to clean, organize, and tidy so that her parents' home could be healthy and livable. Then, as the years continue to pass and she maintains her cleanliness, she meets a paralyzed Vietnam veteran named Daniel while she was volunteering at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting for wounded veterans. And as their relationship grows, they eventually marry and become pregnant, which, even though they have lived comfortably since a baby's on the way, it has caused them to reevaluate their finances. And while Daniel wants to sell his antique car to make a little extra money, Vera is determined to find another way. Yet it's not until a vacuum salesman comes to their home does she consider the profession of door-to-door sales. So, against her husband's better judgment, she begins selling vacuums and she's a success. Then, after she sells to just about everyone within her local radius, she decides to branch out to homes outside of her familiar grounds. And upon her taking a desolate back road into nowhere, she almost turns around. But before making that turn, she sees an old house where she can potentially sell a vacuum. And despite there being red flags aplenty, she continues forward with the intent to land another sell. However, once this particular resident allows her inside his pigsty of a home, Vera's life will be forever changed, as she is now at the mercy of an oafish homicidal maniac who plans to subject her to unspeakable acts of brutality. And despite the horrors that she suffered, Vera remains adamant that she will not die without putting up a fight. The Slob by Aron Beauregard was self-published in 2019, and in 2022, this cult classic went over the 1,000 review mark on Amazon, and due to its success, it allowed Beauregard to become a full-time author. In that same year of 2019, surrounding the release of The Slob, Beauregard also released Die Tommy, Try the New Candy, and Scary Bastard. And while writing The Slob, Beauregard channeled his depression, personal issues, stress, and real-life horrors and anger into the plot. Fun facts! Here's a few things you might not know about Aron Beauregard. In May 2022, Beauregard wrote a blog on Substack called Pursuing Nightmares. In this blog, he explained that he doesn't have a college degree and he barely graduated high school. Because of his experiences, he expressed his gratitude to a senior English teacher who helped him along his way. As an adult, Beauregard worked in a call center and he performed in an indie rock band. Although in his adult years he was arrested for shrooms, he credits all of his experiences for making him the person and the writer that he is today. And it was during rehab that he encountered bone-chilling stories from those who suffered addiction. Also, throughout his journey, he dealt with many personal family issues that left him in dark and depressed places along the entire way. He credits his mother as a huge inspiration due to everything that she survived, and he owes much of his success to her. And he noted that whenever he's down, he'll think about the demons that she's defeated and continues to defeat, and it inspires him. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler segment, which I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience of this book for you if you've never read it before. Also, this is where I'm going to get into some nasty detail about what happens throughout this book. And if this is something that you do not care to hear about, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments and you'll see that I have a pinned comment at the top with the timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few moments that were absolutely disturbing. First up is the scene when the Slob sexually assaulted Vera and mutilated her unborn baby. Now, leading up to this, Vera arrived at a massive house in the middle of nowhere, and despite this house being barred and emitting an awful stench, she shrugged away all of the red flags and continued forward with the hopes of selling another vacuum. Well, upon meeting the morbidly obese homeowner, also known as the Slob, she offered to demonstrate her vacuum on his filthiest of carpets, which, even though this entire house was just as repulsive as its resident, and she had her pick of anywhere to vacuum, she followed him upstairs to a bedroom. Once there, he imprisoned her with the remains of a woman who had been reduced down into a mound of gore. Hours later, the Slob returns with a steaming plate of meat for her to eat, which this is obviously from the woman he had previously murdered. Then, after he leaves her be and some more time passes, he eventually returns with a woman who has a garbage bag over her head, which it's at this point that he sees Vera had refused to eat. So, as a form of punishment, he beats her unconscious. And to make matters worse, when Vera wakes up, not only is she naked and tied to the bed, but she discovers that the slob is sexually assaulting her with the meat that she was supposed to eat. When he finishes, he pulls the meat out from where he shoved it and forces her to eat it. But if that isn't bad enough, as Vera's trying to regain control of herself, he brings over a 25-pound dumbbell and beats her in the stomach until her unborn baby is pulverized. Once he's finished, he digs out the remains of her fetus and proceeds to force feed that to her. Also, since he was unable to retrieve all parts of her dead baby, he uses the vacuum to suck the rest out. And this is while its deep cleaning feature shoots scalding water into her womb. Obviously, by the look on my face, this moment was an assault on the senses, and once I was able to compose myself, I noticed how its hyperviolence was to the point that no human body should be able to withstand what Vera had experienced. And it was at this point that I felt like the author was using absurdity as a form of horror to shock and repulse his readers, which obviously he achieved. Now, of course, this type of absurd horror has been done before, and it has been done since this book's release. And similar to how I felt when I watched Terrifier 2, when I read this, I was like, damn, how much of this is she going to take before her body simply gives out? Which, considering this act happens at the 64% mark of the book, I realized things were going to get a whole hell of a lot worse before they got better. But while some people might have a problem with the absurdity of Vera surviving everything she was put through, I really had no problem suspending my disbelief because before I went into this book, I figured that I would be met with some pretty exaggerated scenarios simply due to having read Beauregard before. Next up is the scene where Sandra is revealed. So, after Vera passes out from being brutalized, later that night she woke up to the woman who had been brought in with a garbage bag over her head. And upon her waking up, she sees that this stranger is tied to a nearby chair and she's asking for Vera to untie her. Which, after Vera sets her free, she identifies herself as Sandra, and she removes the garbage bag to reveal that she has been scalped and her lips have been torn off. Also, during this time, Sandra reveals that their captor doesn't keep the girls for long, and he follows a routine where he abuses them for about a week or so, and once he's tired of assaulting them or he has mangled them too much, he disposes of them. Furthermore, she notes that she's been here for a little over 2 weeks and she has seen a dozen girls come and go. Then, to add the cherry on the cake, Sandra squats to relieve herself, which, in turn, Vera sees that Sandra's missing lips have been sewn onto her vagina. You know what? Even though everything was absolutely grotesque the moment that the bag was removed from Sandra's head, the reveal of her lips sewed to her vagina was pretty disgusting, and it made me feel both repulsed and humiliated for her. Like, personally, I put myself in her shoes, and I tend to think to myself, self? If someone sewed my lips to my ass, I would just go ahead and throw my hands up and say, go ahead and kill me. I mean, I could deal with being scalped. I could deal with having my lips torn off. However, having my lips sewn to my nether regions is a whole other level of being humiliated and defiled that I just can't begin to fathom. And last is the grand finale, which, before this goes down, Sandra and Vera orchestrated a scene to make the slob think that they had turned on each other and they're dead. Now, to start with, everything went as planned as their captor became preoccupied with Sandra long enough for Vera to sneak downstairs and take a gun from his gun cabinet. But after Vera crept up on the slob as he was sexually assaulting what he believed was Sandra's corpse, everything took a wrong turn. Because when Vera pulled the trigger, Sandra bolted upright, and due to bad timing, Vera accidentally shot Sandra in the head. After that, the slob knocks Vera out, and after a while she wakes up to find herself in a barn where she has been chained to the ground in a cage full of dead bodies. Also, not far away, she sees two massive boiling vats and a grinder, which, at this point, it's revealed that the vats are full of dead women, and the slob uses the grinder to reduce them into mush where their remains can be canned. From here, Vera endures days of sexual assault, and the slob goes into a routine where he eats the mush produced by the grinder. In turn, he regurgitates everything into her face while he is assaulting her. Then, after fearing this to be the end, fate has a change of plans as the slob just so happens to drop off a corpse that had a Walkman on its body. Upon taking the Walkman, Vera listens to the music where she becomes empowered by hearing Michael Jackson's Beat It. So, after rebuilding her willpower, she beats the teeth out of all of the dead bodies around her and collects the fragments. And she keeps doing this until she has about 2 fistfuls of sharded teeth. On top of that, she's able to break away a bone from one of the other corpses. Come the next day, when the slob goes to sexually assault her again, he rams his penis inside her, only to discover that she had shoved a splintered bone up her vagina, which slices his penis open. Then, as he freaks out, she catches him off guard by throwing the shards of broken teeth that she had collected into his mouth. At this point, Vera grabs the keys from him, sets herself free, and she's able to make it to the vats. Following her escape, as he pursues her, she pulls the bone out that she had hid in her vagina and uses it to stab him in the jaw. In turn, this attack causes him to fall backwards into the grinder, where she's able to pull the vat lever, which covers him in boiling liquid and dead women. So, while this was absolutely disgusting, I really enjoyed how Vera improvised. I mean, I probably wouldn't have thought about shoving a splintered bone up myself and using the teeth of dead people as a means of defense, but you know what? It worked. And not only that, but because of how this played out, it was just one of the many absurd moments that this book presented. Also, I'm not certain if I'm the only one who feels this way, but it seemed like the ending was very Hansel and Gretel in a sense that the slob intended to put Vera in a vat and grind her up. And instead, she reverses the roles, which personally, I feel like the slob's death was too easy for him, considering all of the crap that he did, but I understand Vera had to act fast. I would like to take this opportunity to bitch. All right, perverts, let me break it down for you. At the end of this puke fest, it's revealed that a cult of wealthy gays had orchestrated the whole operation at the Slob's Pad so they could produce canned meat for cannibals. Also, it's revealed that they required the remains of brutalized young women because they thought it would make them more feminine. Now, I don't know about the rest of you Nelly little queens out there, but my hand fluttering ass has never needed to eat anyone to make myself more feminine. Instead, my little flamboyant self was just curated throughout the years by good old fashioned genetics that more than likely traced all the way back to Eve. And I say Eve because I could totally see myself hanging out with a talking snake and eating the hell out of some fresh picked fruit. But I digress. Back to the matter at hand. Cannibal gays who eat women to become more femme. Like, the absurdity of this honestly made me laugh out loud, and it was the cherry on the cake of a book that was absolutely insane as hell. The Slob by Aron Beauregard is a repulsive piece of fiction that is truly not for the easily offended. And while it's not the most repulsive thing I've ever read, it does its job as extreme horror and or splatterpunk. Aside from that, I felt like the lead protagonist was worthy of our sympathy and the lead antagonist was intimidating. As far as themes were concerned, this book presented subjects of depression, fat exploitation, homophobia, poverty, and misogyny. Character wise, Beauregard really shines when creating protagonists that I care about. And in particular, I really felt connected to Vera, who, ever since her childhood, had been met with conflict after conflict that she was able to overcome. Also, considering her financial background, I could totally relate to her drive to ignore some of the red flags and continue forward trying to make sales. Other than her, although her husband was a secondary character, I still did care about him, especially since Vera had helped to elevate him from his PTSD after he served in the military. Which, due to his reliance on Vera, I feel like their relationship was a contributing factor that gave her the gumption to push forward for survival. Also, I really did admire their relationship in general, as it seemed like they shared a mutual respect and love for one another. Now, in regards to the Slob, who remains nameless throughout, I felt like his development paid homage to other villains who have a larger build. And it made me think of characters like Ethel from Criminally Insane, or Buddy from Slaughterhouse, or the more popular Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And personally, I don't know if the author is a fan of John Waters or not, but this is the second Beauregard book I've read where he zones in on the grotesque genital descriptions of his antagonist. For example, with Playground, he gave great attention to a senior citizen's anatomy and her bodily fluids. And with this book, he focuses on the nether regions of the slob, which, because of how he gives such repulsive detail to the anatomy of these characters, I'm reminded of movies like Female Trouble, Desperate Living, and the infamous Pink Flamingos. Theme-wise, this book focuses on depression and PTSD, which this is primarily seen by how the house of a hoarder, or a filthy house, is a reflection of untreated mental illness. For example, with Vera's upbringing, it's revealed that her father was an amputee due to him serving in the military, her sister suffered from bipolar mood swings, and her mother worked full time. Now, obviously, Vera's parents are hindered due to her father being handicapped and her mother working full time to support their family. But on top of that, when a person suffers from depression, that individual can experience no motivation or they can lack the energy to accomplish basic tasks, such as what's seen here. Aside from that, Vera's childhood home is full of junk, and because of how her home is described, the idea of hoarding comes into play, which hoarding can be caused by one or multiple issues, such as emotional attachments, the fear of needing items in the future, poor decision making, coping mechanisms, and the list continues. But while we're never given a solid answer as to why the hoarding occurred, it's safe to say depression played a huge factor into Vera's childhood atmosphere. Now, as far as PTSD is concerned, not only is this briefly shown with Vera's father, but it's shown with Vera's husband Daniel, who suffered paralysis due to war injury. And because of his experiences, he had turned to alcohol to cope. However, due to him getting help and fate bringing Vera into his life, he was able to improve. But to circle back around to filth being a side effect of depression, even though Daniel couldn't walk to be able to properly clean, he returned to drinking and leaving a mess when Vera went missing. Other than Daniel, we have Vera, who has endured a great deal of horrors from being trapped at the Slob's house. And before the book can end, she reasons Daniel's life was ruined in Nam, and hers was ruined on the last day of vacuum cells. Which, aside from the physical scars that they have suffered, it's pretty obvious that their mental state will suffer for possibly the rest of their life. Another subject that comes into play is fat exploitation. And while any sort of fat shaming is wrong, I feel like the description of the slob was done for two reasons. One of which was to obviously provide shock value. But more importantly, when it came down to helping others, Vera's personality type was that of a compulsive fixer. So, with that in mind, the slob's appearance and his mannerisms felt necessary as they played into Vera's nature of wanting to fix or help another person, similar to how she did with her childhood home or Daniel. Also, in regards to the slob's appearance and mannerisms, I feel like he is the ultimate personification of filth and the reflection of the house in which he resides. And since cleanliness is next to godliness, this antagonist and his surroundings is entirely absent from anything godly. Which this is kind of ironic since Beauregard quoted Joan Osborne at the beginning by asking her famous question of, what if God was one of us, just a slob like one of us? So, with that context, is the author suggesting that the slob is supposed to be a representation of God? If so, could this figure suggest the wrath of God? If not, could this quote have simply been chosen for no other reason than to add a twisted sense of humor to this work? Next up is the subject of homophobia, and this comes into play due to a twist near the end that, unfortunately, I can't elaborate on due to spoilers. However, I can say that one particular scene doesn't paint gay guys out in the best light. And while I can see where this could be offensive to some, I personally didn't feel offended. Also, I don't believe the author is homophobic. And while this creative choice is problematic, I feel like the absurdity of what happens is just the cherry on the cake for a book that's absurd to start with, especially if one was to consider how there's no way humanly possible that some of the characters survived what they went through. With that said, since this book does take place in the 1980s, when gays were seen as predators and they were highly discriminated against, it feels like this creative choice comments on the irrational fears of the times, which sadly, very little has gotten better for LGBTQ plus people since that decade. Next up is the subject of poverty, and this is primarily seen with men in Vera's life. For example, although her father and husband are wounded veterans, we see how the system has failed to properly assist them and their families. However, between the two, I feel like this topic is more relevant with Daniel as we receive a more detailed portrait of what he and Vera are going through with expecting a child. Which, because of him being disabled and Vera needing to take medical leave from work, Daniel wants to sell his car to help get them over this hump. In turn, due to them not having the proper funds and Vera not wanting Daniel to get rid of something that he loves, she takes on the job of vacuum sales to help save for the hard times ahead. And even though she was motivated to financially provide, due to what happens at her last cell stop, it shows how a person might ignore red flags because they need the money and they want to properly provide for themselves or their loved ones. On the reverse side of the coin, opposing those who are doing their damnedest to scrape by, we do have the subject of rich privilege that comes into play at the end. But speaking of that here would of course reveal spoilers, so moving on. And last is the subject of misogyny. For starters, this is seen when Vera applies for the door-to-door sales position, and she was told by the hiring manager that the job is intended to be filled by a man due to safety reasons. And while that might be so, Vera is a grown woman and she is well aware of the dangers at hand without a man bringing this to her attention. Other than that, we have the actions of the slob, which presents every form of abuse imaginable towards women. And while it's easily assumed that he has treated all women horribly, we receive a first-hand account of his actions with Vera. which, among the abuse that he puts her through, he ignores consent, takes liberty over her body so that she has no choice, he forces her to clean up his messes, and obviously, he treats her like an object. And because of how this is described, I feel like this book commented on the toxic male, and while doing so, it amplified domestic abuse with that personality type. Overall, the slob didn't scare me, creep me out, or even really gross me out, as I feel like I've read other books that have prepared my gag reflex for moments like this. Even still, I was invested in Vera, and I feel like this was a quick read. The Slob by Aron Beauregard was obviously disgusting, and it did what it was set out to do. Now, with that being said, while Aron Beauregard's specialty is extreme horror and or splatterpunk, I do feel like his work wouldn't be half as effective if he didn't provide solid character development. Also, since this book took place in the 80s, I feel like Beauregard was able to capture the vibe of that decade pretty well, and I think he did a good job on paying homage to the 80s type of underground blood, gore, and absurdity with its kills and end result. So, overall, if you're looking for a quick read that will quench your thirst for gore, then I do recommend The Slob. Just be aware that this book is full of trigger warnings. Since we're at the end of this video, I would just like to note if you would care to hunt me down on social media, or if you would like to join my Patreon, or if you would like to become a member of this channel, I have links available for all of that in the description section of this video. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell, as I do have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.